Everybody doing garage workouts? Staying active? Basement workouts? I have a few minutes to just, mic up and talk a little bit. It's okay. We can converse for a few. I'm really just stalling to try to make time to get these headphones to work.
Yes, lots of random different workouts.
I really tried to we did single dumbbell thrusters in our garage today. Just kind of held one. Those were unique.
I actually found some I'm in a rented building, so I rent the first flat of a building, and I found these old weights. I'm going to grab them real quick.
We have some great ones that Joe used that I can't wait to show as well. Some products from the 50s and 60s.
They're like these old plastic covered, like 17 and a half pound weights. They're like cracked and they were all dusty. And so we pulled them out and cleaned them off.
If you didn't start your weight training career with those in like your parents' basement, like we didn't grow up, because that's exactly how I learned how to bench press with like a bar that's like so thin that like I don't even, you know what I mean?
Uh-huh. There was a really thin bar downstairs near them, but it didn't look safe. I had nothing to like fixate the weights with, so.
Remember the old clamps that went on and then you screwed the screw in?
Yep.
Plate on?
The ones you spun on the end?
Yep, never worked.
I always wanted a set of those, I don't know who made them, Bowflex or somebody, like the twist to your weight that you wanted and pull them off the rack. And
Select X.
Yeah, I wanted a set of those so bad.
They make those for kettlebells now.
I bet you can find some old ones on like Craigslist or something. Facebook Marketplace, someone's selling some old gear.
I gotta imagine they're only trash. Twist it to 25 and like 35 comes off. One side heavier than the other. I don't know. All right, what do we got? We got 20 of us on here, which is good numbers. Some of us enjoying dinner, some of us enjoying a cocktail. My dinner is Kelsey's cooking some pork tenderloin tonight, which should be swell. Housekeeping stuff first. We are into week 6 now. That's right, Fred? Week 6? I don't even know what day it is anymore. Someone told me it was Monday. My phone reminded me that we have a call tonight. It just seems like everything's running together. It all feels like an endless Thursday right now. But we're week 6. We're wrapping up overhead squat week, and we are going to get to a bunch of videos. Alan posted the course or the week summary of the lecture content per usual with our key take-home points. Before we jump into that and get started, just a couple things to touch on. Next week going forward was gymnastics week, so we're gonna have to get creative with some of you that don't have access to a pull-up bar. We are gonna talk at the end of the hour about some gymnastic shapes, positions, hollow hold and arch hold that are gonna be a good option if you simply can't jump up on anything, you just don't have access to it. If you do have access to it, you're gonna be leading the way as far as giving our class something to look for strict pull-ups, for kipping pull-ups, and be able to base our movement assessment off of next week. So we'll get into that at the end. We are coming to the end of this course, and the final 2 weeks are our Olympic lifting unit, our snatch and our clean units. And we do have some resources on hand as far as video analysis stuff that we've done in the past. Alan and I have done some R-path analysis. So if a lot of us are in dire form of not being able to execute a clean or a snatch based on our current situations, we'll be posting those periodically throughout those weeks to give you something to kind of be looking at digesting, one of which just went up on the Ice Physio account, I believe today. That's right, Alan, which I did a 7-minute, I think it's like 7 or 8 minutes long, just a weightlifting bar path and coaches eye breakdown. So that went out to the public. That's something that you guys can take a look at, and that's kind of get your wheels turning about what we'll be doing in the final 2 weeks of the course. Also be thinking too of like when we take questions online, this course is coming to an end pretty quick, and we want to hear your questions specifically over anything else. So don't hold them all until week 8, because it may get crazy as far as how many questions we start fielding in the very last meeting we have. So if you've got something that's like on your mind as far as a certain patient you're treating, then maybe it's not directly related to the overhead squat per se. That's okay. We can still field that question tonight and start to get the ball rolling, and have some good Q&A discussion for the final couple weeks here. So be thinking about those. Shoot those out to us tonight as we're on the call. Last topic before we take any questions is one that got discussed on the Facebook thread just today, and I think it's a really good point, and one that's worth identifying and mentioning is the conversation around load, primarily when we say loaded up. Loaded up is a couple things. One, it's our motto as both clinicians and athletes, and it's secondarily it's a compliment, right? What that means is when we say, hey, like, looks good, looks light, want to see it heavier, what we mean by that is your movement looks perfect, relatively speaking, under these conditions. And while I can't pick up on any major faults, if I continue to challenge your motor control and challenge your limitations under heavier load, we'll start to pick up on faults, right? We saw this primarily in the deadlift week, where a lot of folks doing a light deadlift. Nothing I can really add here, nothing I can really tell you about your setup or execution at this load. Let's continue building heavier and see what kind of faults show up down the line. So when we say what we need to see, or when we say this looks too light or we need to see more load on board, what we're saying is, hey, currently under your abilities and the way you're moving it, it looks perfect. We want to see it heavier to see when things start to break down where your limitations and where your weaknesses lie, because we know that we're only getting part of the equation under lighter loads, PVC, etc. Now, if that's all you have access to, fine. But at the end of the day, that should be a confidence booster to you, being like, hey, you know, I executed that pretty well. I need to take the next step, go a little bit heavier and see how I do at that, and give you kind of a boost as you move forward, right? And again, that's a motto that we really should strongly adopt as clinicians, of saying, like, looks good, let's go heavier. That confidence needs to come from us first if we expect our patients to be confident moving load and getting stronger as well, right? So when we look at, Alan and I are always seeing folks in the clinic, we have them deadlift, and they look at us like cautiously, like, is my spine gonna break? And we're like, and we shake our head at them, they're like, what? And we're like, that was way too light. Now we need to throw 25 more pounds on that. We need to throw 50 more pounds on that. Because that's our way of saying, like, you're moving super well, mechanics, consistency, all intact. Let's load this up and get heavier, and see what happens under that, because that's where the true adaptations are going to take place. So just a good point and a good discussion point that's worth noting to us, to get the ball rolling as far as Q&A is concerned for tonight. So with that, let me mute my mic and ask you guys, what questions do you have, overhead squat related or week lecture related in review, that you want to throw out there?
I wanted to ask, so the heart rate variability was very cool as far as, you know, with your more advanced athletes and just giving them data that can join, and you can train them, you can have multiple members join. That was really cool. What I was trying to figure out is for your general population, I feel like a lot of people like that feedback. Is there something else that you would do for just the general population that you know is just not going to be interested to that level, but some other form of, you know, visual feedback or something that they're getting that just gets them more in tune and, you know, really appreciating what they're getting, other than telling them, obviously, like, you're gaining weight, you're doing these kinds of things. But I'm seeing that getting that feedback just goes a long way to really further get that buy-in.
Yeah, a couple points there is that we have the vast majority of the gym using Whoop, and those are not, you know, advanced elite athletes. Those are regular general population folks who just come to the CrossFit gym 1 hour a day, a couple days a week to work out. They've all jumped on Whoop just kind of by like social motion. One person got it, Mitch and I got it a couple years ago, and then some other people got it, and then other people wanted to know what they had. And then, you know, pretty much at that point, half of the gym, 75% of the gym has one. So don't put it in your mind that it's only something an elite competitive athlete would want access to. A lot of folks jumped on it. If for anything else, for accountability, a lot of folks in the gym have stopped drinking alcohol completely because of what their Whoop shows them as far as their recovery. But if that's not in the cards, commitment wise, price wise, what I start with folks is HRV for training. Or as we talked about in the lecture, a lot of folks have access to HRV stuff now on Apple Watch and Fitbit, and they don't even know it. So if you have somebody who's coming to the clinic and they're wearing a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, there's a good chance they have access to their HRV data already. I use it a lot clinically with my non-athletes, which I hate to use that term, but folks who would never consider group fitness or regular fitness as a part of their life. I use it with those folks, especially those folks who are dealing with persistent pain. That's a great way to show somebody change in a population that usually is used to never seeing change, to always being in terrible pain, always having 10 out of 10 pain, never seeing any improvement in anything they do. If you can get them looking at their HRV some way, if they're using HRV4 on their phone, if they're using their Apple Watch or their Fitbit, or even if they do decide to grab a Whoop, that's a great way for those folks to watch some change happen and kind of show them that their body, their brain is capable of change. If they can commit to a serving or two of green leafy vegetables a day, or cutting back on alcohol, can we see some change in your HRV? Yes, that shows us your body's capable of change. We can change your nervous system. That means eventually we can change your pain and make some positive change over time. So that's a great way to get buy-in, especially with those persistent pain folks.
And the price limitation here is really not all that steep, right? Like, it can be as cheap as what, Alan, $15 a month now, which is 50 cents a day. If you strategize it and use the ICE discount code, but it's really not that steep of a commitment, especially when you frame it in the terms of like, hey, let's do 6 months of a lifestyle intervention. Like lifestyle interventions aren't going to happen in 4 weeks or 6 weeks. Like this is going to take time. So let's use this Whoop, this guided daily metric for 6 months. I think a lot of people think of it as like an indefinite expense that they've got to shell out for the rest of their life. That's not the case at all. Like, you can stop that at any time. Just sign up for 6 months. Let's do a 6 months lifestyle intervention. Let's help this guide your sleep. Let's gamify lifestyle intervention a little bit, give you a score report for how you're doing, red light, yellow light, green light, and help them move in a better direction and see how well that does for their pain, how much better subjective they're feeling, how much more energy they have during the day, how much more ready they are to want to exercise or train, all those other variables that we can see go along with that, and to see like the positive rewards that come with a more beneficial nutritional plan, right? Like, eating vegetables doesn't have an immediate return on anything except for on your Whoop, right? You can see your HRV improve. You can see yourself going from a yellow light to a green light with the more vegetables you intake, right? Otherwise, you're investing in the long-term future of your health. But the Whoop is something that can showcase like, hey, when I ate really good the last 2 days, my HRV has been really, really good as well. So it's something that shows that immediate feedback that humans tend to crave a bit more.
While we're on that subject of the nutrition, just one other thing. So obviously back in my school days, obviously I took some nutrition classes, but it's been a few years, so I'm not as confident and comfortable with that. Do you guys have classes with that, or quick resource as far as getting a little more confident with that?
Yeah, I'll share a slide we talk about in our live course that's kind of quick and dirty things nutrition-wise to talk about with patients and athletes. The biggest thing is going to depend on your state. Some states are like Michigan, which is a gray state, which I can talk about anything nutrition-wise with a patient. There's nothing in or not in our Practice Act that says we can't. Some states say you can only make recommendations that are very general, like eat more plants, drink less beer. In some states say you can't talk about nutrition at all with your patients by law. So you have to know your Practice Act, but I'll share a slide. The main thing is you have to hammer on, especially your active folks, your athletes, that they're getting enough protein. I always ask people hate to track their food. Just ask Mitch. People hate to track their food, but ask them to track for a week. And what you will find is that your active folks are generally under-eating, and they're under-eating their protein by a lot. And that's where their recovery's at. That's where their strength is at. That's where their muscle mass is at, or I should say not at, because once they're tracking everything they're eating for a week, you'll find that they're under-eating, and they're under-eating protein. That's shown again and again and again in active folks, that maybe they do hit their calorie recommendation, but they're definitely not hitting their protein, which is 0.8 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight a day, which is a lot more protein than most folks realize. And then beyond that, kind of your standard 1 to 2 gallons of water a day, have as many plants for carbs as you can, that sort of stuff, but really, really, really hammering you can't cheat calorie balance and that you need to get enough protein.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll throw that slide in the Facebook group after tonight's call.
Alan, we also planned it and are wearing the same shirt today. So
you know what's funny? Guillermo asked me why I'm matching you, and I said you were upset that I did another gym's workout, and I wanted to make you feel better, so I put.
Alan's been cheating on his own community, and it all feels like he's posting pictures of his hotter girlfriend or something lately, and I'm not feeling super well about it. I said, "Are you still a member of CrossFit Fenton?" "Yeah, I just wanted to work out with my girlfriend via the internet." It was a cute gesture, though.
Thank you.
Other relevant questions?
I have a question. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, sorry. So while we're on Whoop, what are your thoughts on like the psychological effects of Whoop? So say like it tells you that you're severely under recovered for that morning when you wake up, but you wake up feeling amazing, you know, and you're ready to crush the workout, but it tells you, hey, you didn't get enough sleep as you thought you did, so maybe you should take it easy. Whereas vice versa, you know, exact opposite, where you wake up, feeling super bad, you know, you feel like you didn't get enough recovery, but your Whoop is telling you, hey, you're like 98% recovered, like have at it today. What are your thoughts on that?
Couple things. Very rarely does that happen, that you feel great and it shows you're in the red. Usually you're on the yellow or green on those days. I've never had it consistently where I feel terrible and I'm in the green. What I've seen with my Whoop is that when I'm in the red for a couple days, I'm usually about to get sick. So very rarely does that matchup happen like that. What I always tell people is you're still listening to your body. You're not letting this objective watch thing rule your life. If you wake up and you feel great, and you know that you're not at risk for overtraining, that you didn't just do a huge session yesterday or run a marathon the day before, then go for it. What we're watching on Whoop is trends over time. We're watching out for multiple days in a row of red. Why are you red for 3, 4, 5 days in a row? Those folks find out they've maybe went on a vacation bender and they were in Cancun drinking, or maybe they're about to get sick, or something is going on lifestyle wise that's causing that multiple day red streak. But just one day in the red doesn't mean stay home and don't go to the gym. What we're watching for is those trends over time. So if you wake up and you're in the red and you feel good, then go for it. If you're in the red the next day and the next day after that, that's when we have to pull back and say, what's going on? Have I changed my diet? Have I changed my sleep? Is something going on with my training? Am I training a lot of volume? Is something going on that maybe we're worried about an injury about to happen or an illness? But otherwise, you know, one day is just a one-off thing. And what I tell people is if you wake up every day and you're on the yellow and you're going to the gym or going to the track or whatever every day, then you're right where you should be. You're moderately recovered and you're training hard multiple days in a row. That tells us that your body is responding just fine to that workload. It's when we start to see multiple days in a row of red or green. You know, if you're green 3, 4, 5 days in a row, you're probably not training hard enough. Maybe you're doing some light recovery stuff or not exercising at all, but you're probably not challenging your nervous system with heavy conditioning or heavy lifting enough to be in the yellow. So be wary of the inverse as well.
A good example of this, like when it's like trends, like what does that look like? It's not a clinical example. It's in our gym athlete example, and this was months ago before coronavirus was even talked about at all. A nurse at our gym, she's my age, so she's almost 30 or just turned 30. One of our better athletes, RX's a majority of workouts, puts up very good times. She came into class at like a 7 a.m. class, and she had just posted the day before like her Whoop 19%. She was like end of day 3 in the hospital, 12-hour shifts, or she picked up a 16. So I kind of via social media could kind of piece together that she was beat down. I could go into Whoop and look on Whoop teams, and I could look at like 3 or 4 days in the red in a row if I wanted to see those. But she stumbles into 7 a.m. class, and we've got a benchmark up on the board that's, not super heavy. It's totally a weight that she should do on a normal day. And the look on her face was just like, I just don't have it. And I was like, I literally let her off the hook before she even had to, like, athletes aren't going to tell you, coach, I'm not going to do that weight today. I don't feel good. Like, they're going to try to like muster it up for you. Like, I'm tough. I'm mentally tough. I can do this. And I was like, you're not going to do this today. And she's like, I'm so glad you said that, because I just don't feel like. I'm like, you picked up a 16. This is day, you rocked 3 days in the hospital in a row. It's 7 a.m. You're short sleep. Like, you're going to go lighter, and I just want you to move well today. I want you to make sure your back doesn't bother you or anything like that, and just try to breathe a little bit and get a sweat on. Like, no pressure of this being a benchmark, or like you got to hit a PR today, anything like that. And we're going to intentionally reduce the loads so that you don't push yourself to strive for that. That's just one way of utilizing that to get ahead of the issue and to see trends, or to be kind of like dialed into those before they're a problem, right?
Mitch, what's that thing you told Jeff about scaling? Never, always, whatever.
Not always, I'm getting it wrong. Not always bad, but if always bad, right? Because Jeff was a permanent scaler. He put himself in the scaled class all the time. And I said, Jeff, scaling's not always bad, but if always might be bad, right? So kind of encouraging those folks when they need to go RX and when they need to push it and step up, and also reminding them when it's a good idea to scale it back down.
Yeah, I think especially for your CrossFitters, especially that have been doing it a while and are used to RXing the movements and the workload, and just the idea of scaling to them is something that new people do. It's not something I do. I haven't scaled a workout in years or ever. That it's okay to reduce the load if you're feeling rough that day. Again, you should always listen to your body. Live to fight another day is a principle. People will learn to adapt if they're smart early on, or after a bunch of injuries later on.
I just had a clarification question on that slide in the PowerPoint that was like, it was graphed MAV, so maximal adaptive volume over time, and it was showing like the novice, intermediate, and how it was getting like smaller. Was it getting smaller as the person gets older, or was it getting smaller as they become more a master of their sport?
Yes.
Yeah, training age. Training age is what's worth identifying there, because we still know that our geriatric older adults can still see a lot of strength adaptations, right? So it's not just pure age number on the scale, but training age more so than anything, right? Those novice. Yeah, exactly. The novice gains are like exponential, right? Like, I just PR'd by 30 pounds. If every time I squat, I PR'd by 30 pounds, I should be at a 600-pound squat in no time, right? And then that marginally, everyone that's like laughing right now, because they're like, yeah, that starts to taper it and narrow down. And then the longer an athlete's been training and their age catches up to them, the masters athletes that are, 55 plus, you start to have that discussion like, you've been training hard for 30 years, you know what I mean? And now you're in a category where you're 55, you're still pushing out, you're still setting PRs. They just happen fewer and farther in between. And we just have to be smarter about when we take rest days, when we push for benchmarks, when we're trying to set PRs, and when we're, like Alan said, just training to train another day. And that can be more psychological, along with the physiological. The physiological lessons start to beat down in them. They'll just be like, man, I just can't hang with the younger athletes at all. But it ultimately becomes more of a psychological, like, I'm not weak. I'm not getting weak. I'm just listening to my body. And genetically, I'm just not going to recover as fast as I did 20 years ago or 15 years ago or 10 years ago when I did this stuff.
Okay. And then I guess it was another clarification question about that study that showed 80 hours to return to baseline HRV after the one rep max testing. Were they doing like regular conditioning during the period of recovery, or was it just like 80 hours of nothing?
No, well, so if you dig into the methodology of that study, they had them max out initially. They had them come in every 24 hours and max out again. 24 hours later, max out again. 24 hours later, max out again. And those of you who ever max anything out, you're like, geez, that sounds awful. To max out front squat, deadlift, strict press, bench press every 24 hours for 5 data collection points, and just seeing how long it takes for that recovery between those bouts. It takes 80 hours from when they stop to come back to baseline. So just knowing that a max level event like a lifting max out or a half or a full marathon or something like that, something that's very, very, very tough on the body, takes about 80 hours to recover without doing anything in between. So they weren't doing active recovery or anything like that. They were just saying, from the last time we max out, how much to get back to that baseline of strength from the first time we maxed out. It took about 80 hours.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Good question.
I have a question about the math for the acute to chronic workload ratio.
We don't have that much time. I'm just
okay.
I'm just
kidding. Oh, okay.
that was an acute to chronic workload ratio joke.
Good joke. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I know that the units are not going to be exact, but looking at the recommendations, so it's 1250 acute, 8450 chronic, but then obviously that doesn't come out to the math doesn't add up there. And then looking at your separate presentation on the math, it looks like they're averaging like 2,000 units acute per week. So, but then when it was calculated, it appeared that they were almost to the point of undertraining. So can you, I don't know if there's a way you can clarify that.
Yeah, the quickest way to clarify that is to know that the research behind it is done on professional rugby players who are training 2 to 3 times a day. So they are doing a lot of training, a lot of conditioning, and that's where those higher end chronic numbers come from. Those numbers are really hard to hit if you're going to the gym or going for a run 3 to 4 days a week for an hour or so. You'll have a really hard time hitting the 8,000-ish units. So that's kind of one of the cons of the acute to chronic workload ratio research. That whole line of research is done on professional athletes who train all day, every day for a living. So
okay, that makes sense. So they have like basically a bunch of extra small, lower intensity workouts mixed in throughout their day.
Yep, because they're doing strength training, they're doing conditioning, they're doing actual practice, rugby practice, and all that is adding to that huge level of chronic training baseline that's going to be hard for the normal person that has a job and kids and stuff to actually hit. So that's one of the critiques of that line of research, is that it's hard to take that and say that it's completely generalizable to the average person, the average gym goer, the average runner, that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good question. Other questions before we take a look at your overhead squats?
Yeah, I actually have one more question regarding shoulder positioning for either the overhead squat or the snatch. So I know in CrossFit, they really emphasize kind of that like external rotation of the shoulder, whereas like I know some of the Olympic weightlifters, they actually kind of preach more of an internally rotated shoulder. So I don't know if you have like a positional stance on that, or is it more kind of like, oh, it depends situation?
I love this question, and Peter, that's perfect. And so let me just clarify a little bit for those that that might be wondering what that question means. So a lot of the CrossFit instructional and some other coaches, I'll just say, will cue an externally rotated arm. So they'll say armpit forward, so as max externally rotated as you can be in the overhead position, as the position that's most stable, most supportive of load overhead. Now, other weightlifting communities, such as the Chinese Olympic weightlifting team, may cue internally rotated in their overhead position, and they put out some of the world's strongest athletes, right? And so it brings up a good dialogue point of like, what's the best position for the shoulder, best position, and what's our stance, as Peter said, like what's our stance on it? Our stance on it is that we don't want to see the shoulder translate under load during movement, okay? So if that means that you're starting in a neutral position and maybe you're creating some inherent amount of external rotation torque, like a joint action, not an end range position, but a joint action, if you will, right? So I'm in a neutral shoulder position. I'm trying to turn elbow out or armpit forward or something like that, right? But then that shoulder, the glenohumeral joint, doesn't translate as I squat down and stand up. That's a good position for us. What we don't want to see is where athletes may start in this externally rotated wound up position, and then as they start to squat down, you see the shoulder do a lot of twisting and then back up again, right? And so we see that a lot of times with athletes trying to falsify a position that they can't maintain as they start to squat down. Maybe that's an ankle mobility limitation. Maybe that's a lat tightness issue, glenohumeral restriction. I don't know, and I almost don't care. But if I can get them into a better position, one a little bit more neutral, maybe that's slightly internally rotated, maybe that's slightly externally rotated, maybe it's a combination, I don't know. But that shoulder doesn't move the whole way they go down, they come up, that's a better position. Alan likes to cue elbow out, right? He'll turn his elbow out. That's a more internally rotated overhead position for him, but he can lock out, press up into the bar stronger, and his shoulder doesn't move when he squats down and stands up. Right or wrong, it's correct in my book because the shoulder doesn't move under load, right? So that's much like it's going back to like knee position or foot position in the squat. Do the toes have to be perfectly straight? Can they be toed out for a good squat? Well, as long as the knee maintains appreciation over the middle of the foot, it's good. So that's the same approach that we have in the shoulder. As long as the glenohumeral joint doesn't translate and rotate under load, whatever you're doing in arm position, arm slot angle that's comfortable for you is good with us. Great question, and one that we want to pause and have any questions on.
Do you always discourage rotation under load, even if it's lighter loads? I mean, so like if you're talking about, I mean, even just like an Arnold press, we get a little bit, I mean, and I suppose it's not internal, external. Maybe it's just more abduction. But I've done some like kettlebell approximation warm-ups, you know, with some internal, external rotation at, you know, either in the frontal plane or sagittal plane and then the frontal plane.
Yeah, I do a lot of those, like kettlebell screwdrivers, arm slot angle, and you can do them laying on your side or propped up to change the arm slot angle. What I like about those is that you can really engage a lot of the small movers of the cuff. Those are typically done under moderate to light loads, like 35-pound kettlebell, 55-pound kettlebell. When we're talking about a 300-pound plus overhead squat, that's a much more significant amount of loads. And so the amount of movement and variability that we want to see get reduced as loads get heavier. Right, so we're okay with under lighter loads, some of that translation, whatever. But when we really start to stack load and axial compression on that shoulder, appreciating there's a labrum in there taking some of that load and trying to stabilize and disperse that load on the labrum, we're trying to minimize how much more axial compression and movement that we have as opposed to under lighter loads. Alan, I think that's a great segue question into looking at some shoulder position for overhead squats. What do you think?
I totally agree with you, Mitchell.
I haven't had a haircut in like 3 weeks, so I'm gonna put the hat over my eyebrows so you don't see how hairy those are getting. Anybody else in the same boat? I'm gonna let this hair grow out. I think that's what I'm gonna do.
I'm just comfortable with probably having a mullet to rock with this mustache by the point this is all over with.
You really should, man. Rest in peace, Joe Diffie, right? Like, did anyone see that? That dude had a mullet of all time. I think you've kind of got a little bit of a Joe Diffie look going on. I think you should just keep going with that, Fred.
I want to rock the, you've been watching Tiger King on Netflix? I want to like.
That's literally what I was just going to reference. I was going to say, I don't know if anyone could rock a mullet as good as that.
Yeah, I want to pull on the top of my hair and then grow out the mullet on the back and keep the stash.
Can someone tell me why Tiger King is taking over the country at this time? Like, why is that the series that everyone's watching?
You got to watch it. It's good.
I started to. Kels kind of vetoed it. She was like, this is retarded. I'm like, what are we doing here?
Okay, so the overhead squat. If you hated overhead lifting, if you hated squatting, you're in trouble. This is a lift where you either have to cheat your mobility with something like lifters for your ankles, or you really need to work on your mobility, especially your shoulder position. So all the points of performance for the squat are the same. So If you had trouble with your squat, you're probably gonna have trouble with your overhead squat. Squat stance, hip crease finishes below the knees. All the other points of performance are the same. And now we have those overhead finish positions that we talked about last week with the press. That's what we're looking for overhead. We want to see the bar over the scapula, not over the crown of the head. And like Mitch talked about, and like we just talked about for the past couple of minutes, we don't want to see any translation under load. So full speed. This is my favorite lift. Not this one. Overhead squats in general, my favorite. So overall, probably my most mechanically sound lift is my overhead squat. So points of performance maintained, mainly looking for that shoulder position. We don't want to see any translation under load. Like Mitch said, what has really helped my overhead squat and snatch is starting to cue myself elbows out and really locking in that stability I find there in the shoulder with my overhead squat. So let's look at Jessica's video. So keeping in mind what we talked about, points of performance, what do we like, not like about this overhead squat? I'm going to pull it back to the start position of the lift. Do we like that bar position? Is it a good position? Is it too far backwards? Is it too far forwards?
Or maybe a little too far backwards.
Could be, and it could be because it's light. Most people don't tend to have this fault with any sort of load, but it's overall a good start position. What I want you to focus on now is ignore that you can see Jessica's shoulders and just watch the rest of the movement. What do we see show up from shoulders down? And Dan gave the correct answer already in the Facebook group, so Dan can't comment. Yeah, forward torso, because we really have a hip hinge dominant squat here, right? And so the overhead squat is never going to be dialed in if our squat mechanics are still not dialed in. So going back to our squat mechanics, we want to see the hips and knees break at the same time, especially in the overhead squat. We want to see, where are my eyes? They should, again, that's a terrible color. They should be fixed on a point on the horizon, just like your squat, right? They should not be looking down at the ground. Mitch tells people in the gym, there's nothing on the ground that can help you. Don't submit to the demons down below. When you stare down at the ground, you tend to fold your trunk forward down at the ground as well. And that's exactly what we see happen here, is that we stick our butt back, we hip hinge our squat and fold forward at the trunk. And of course, if there's any weight on that bar, it would not be up in the air for too long. So we need to go back, really dial in our squat mechanics, make sure that we are squatting with a simultaneous break of the hips and knees, upright gaze on the horizon, and trying to keep our trunk as upright as possible. Once we have that dialed in and can groove that out a lot better, then we can worry about what's going on with that bar. The bar, all things considered, is still, and shoulders are still in a good position representative to the torso. It's just that the torso is completely folded forward. So clean up that squat. What can help here, even in folks who have good ankle mobility, is elevating your heels. A lot of you said, I didn't use plates because I have good ankle mobility. That's true, but what helps is that counterbalance effect. By pitching you forward and throwing you a little bit more forward, your brain's not going to let you fall down towards the ground with weight, and so it's naturally going to pull you back into more upright position. So even if you have good ankle mobility, you can really groove out your overhead squat by putting your heels up on some plates, maybe doing some banded overhead squat drills as well, combining all that together. That looks like this. I'm kind of creeped out by how much this guy looks like me with the red beard and everything. But some banded overhead squats, making sure it's a resistance that you can actually pull back against and maintain a good shoulder position. Put your heels up on some plates and really, really focus on that nice, tall, upright torso as you sink into that overhead squat. So clean up the squat, clean up the torso position, and the overhead position will follow suit. Some of us overall had really, really good overhead squats that could be made even better by grip position. So speaking of interesting workout equipment, Joe's got some nice gear here. I don't know, Joe, where you found this, but it's awesome. Here's Joe's squat.
Came with the house.
Came with the house. Been hearing that a lot tonight. All things considered, great overhead squat. Maybe a little bit of lumbar reversal at the bottom that could be cleaned up. Start position. Maybe we can bring those ribs down a little bit and clear up that butt wink a little bit, but overall not bad. What I see in the shoulder is that it's a little bit soft, and if we look on the front view, I think this bar is just too narrow. This dope bar is just too narrow for Joe. If we could get his hands out a little bit wider, I think that could clean up his shoulder position and be even stronger. But all things considered, great torso position, great squat depth, great overhead squat. What are those, 17 3/4 pounds like Jessica's? How much weight is that?
Dude, you know it's a good house when it comes with a set of weights. You know that you got a good buy.
You know that person bailed quickly when they left all their workout gear there.
I'm not moving that stuff. It's heavy and it's in the basement. I dig this. I think Joe and I think Alyssa's, if I'm not wrong, had two really good overhead squats. Is that what you got queued up next? Yeah, like some of the best in the crew, and they had relatively narrow hand position. So I'm sure when we play Alyssa's through that, you'll see her fighting it forward, is drifting forward on her, even though she's got the most perfect mechanics from a torso, hip, knee position. It's just this grip is just a touch too tight. Right, and so you can see the bar there drifting over this, like the crown of her head, right, which is 2 inches too far forward, which makes whatever load that feels like twice as heavy out there, a couple inches out in front. And so this is a limitation of my hands being too narrow, which brings up a good question of like, how do I figure out what's a right grip position for me, right? So let's have that discussion. Alan told you guys about like widening the bar at your hip, right? Flexing your knee slightly, put the bar in that hip crease and widen your hands out until they're straight. Well, that's a good rule of thumb for getting a relative snatch grip position. But what if I prefer something a little bit more narrow? What if I prefer a grip that's like the one shown here? How would I know if that's okay? Well, if I've got the shoulder mobility for it, I can get by bringing my hands in a bit tighter, right? It's a trade-off from like a mobility and stability perspective when you move your hands wider and narrow. So more motion, more mobility, you'll find inherently more stability going slightly more narrow. If you don't have that kind of mobility, you're going to have to sacrifice by going out wider a little bit, but just making sure that you're still staying engaged and pressing up into the bar. So the wider you have to go depends on how tight your shoulders are and if you can maintain the bar in the correct position going down. As Alan played this video through from the side, you saw it drifting forward a little bit. You flash to the front view, you can see how narrow our hands are. The recommendation here would be easy. Widen the hands out 1, maybe 2 inches. Try it again, and you're going to have much more success keeping the bar back behind your head rather than over your head, and that's going to feel twice as light, half as light, twice as heavy, half as heavy.
One in the bush is worth 2 in hand.
Dang, I'm getting done with this quarantine. Taking an effect. You get my point.
Questions on that? Questions on grip width, finding your overhead squat grip? All right, beautiful.
Is some of the benefit to having that wider grip just like the biomechanics of having the force more directed right into that, like the glenoid fossa, so that there's less work in holding the bar up?
Yeah, totally. So we would call that, this narrow grip that Alyssa has, we would call this almost a squat jerk grip. The closer you can get your arms stacked over, the more weight you're going to be able to lift, right? Because it's a more stable position. The further out the arm gets, the further away we are from that joint, we have a longer lever. It's just going to be more unstable. Tall folks are just have to deal with it with really long arms, but the more narrow we can get our arms in, ideally we would overhead squat here. That's going to be impossible for the vast majority of humans due to shoulder mobility, but we see especially the Chinese weightlifters have that squat jerk grip. Do I have a video? Yes, I have a video. We can see here, once he goes into that jerk, he's going to squat jerk that. And you see how narrow his hands are, probably even more narrow than Alyssa's were, right? You can see how narrow his hands are. That's going to let him lift way more weight than if his hands are out in a wider overhead squat grip or even all the way out at a traditional snatch grip. So the closer we can bring the hands in, the more weight you can lift, you can get. As he does it, he just literally drops underneath of that and overhead squats instead of actually doing a clean and jerk with a split jerk.
I look like Leslie right now every time I see that video. I'm just like mind blown by like, how did he do that? I'm sorry. It's just like so crazy to me. That much weight supported just like that in the deep part of that squat. It's so impressive.
Yeah, that's 456 pounds at 178 pounds body weight. So that's a 300%-ish clean and jerk. He would not be able to lift that much weight at that body weight if he didn't have that level of shoulder mobility to be able to do that very narrow jerk grip. So that we'll see that in Snatch Week as well. We'll look at some of his videos and see that same thing shows up, that he's able to have a more narrow snatch grip and can lift more weight.
Good question down there from Nate to follow up that says, as an athlete's shoulder mobility improves, would you try to change their grip position? And the only athletes that I do that on are ones that have a history of hypermobility, subluxation, stuff with their shoulder when they go overhead. And then I've made the recommendation that, hey, let's bring your grip in a little bit more narrow. They feel more confident. They feel stronger with it a little bit more narrow. Understand that when you tamper with their overhead squat position, it's also directly related to their snatch grip position, which changes their whole snatch mechanic of when they need to arm bend or how they're going to hit the hip crease. So I'm trying not to alter with it all too much, unless it's like, for example, I have a different overhead squat grip during a light Metcon than I do during a 1 rep max overhead squat, right? So a lighter Metcon, let's say it's a 115 pound barbell, I'm going to go with a relatively more narrow grip because I'm going to try to hang on to it for bigger sets, 10, 15, 20 reps at a time. And I'm going to have a little bit more narrow grip that I can lock in and rock and roll with, as opposed to a wider grip for my max load stability where I need to be in perfect position. So for most folks, I don't typically tamper with their grip all too much.
Yeah, good comment by Guillermo. Moving in for athletes with wrist pain with snatch and overhead squat to reduce that radial deviation with the really wide grip is a good fix too. Yeah, we'll see that. I have a video of that. So we got Peter. Peter's obviously a taller athlete. Peter's all the way out of the collars on that barbell. So once he gets that weight overhead, we'll see there's a lot of radial deviation on board just because he's so far out at that collar. This is somebody, as long as he's not having pain, we're okay with that. But again, we really can't bring his grip in because his arms are so long. To keep his arms straight, he's got to be out at those collars. To try and bring him in for his wrist would then result in an inactive shoulder. So your taller folks are going to generally be all the way out at the collars and just generally not be able to move them in. So let's watch Peter's squat. Here is his start position from the front. Let's go to his lateral. Okay, there's his start position. What do we like about that? Like, not like?
He looks pretty well stacked up. Maybe his head's a little bit far forward.
Yeah, maybe his head a little bit too far through and just not stable. He push pressed it up, and we'll see this show up in another video that he posted. but just starting from this kind of not locked out position, hips and knees aren't extended. We're kind of already starting to hyperextend at the back, and then watching him sink down. Fantastic control. Great tempo, maybe too much tempo, going very slow on the way down. Good control in the bottom. And I believe he posted as well the fault he saw the most, which is not standing up after each rep, not standing up, resetting before sinking back into the next rep, kind of keeping that angle of hip and knee flexion on board, and just not really being engaged basically in his whole body as much as he could be. And we see that show up in a video where he went a little bit heavier. Same fault show up, obviously, with heavier load. Slow tempo is going to be more fatiguing. Taking 1, 2, 3 seconds with a 2 or 3 second pause at the bottom is going to be very fatiguing, on top of just not really getting set and being patient a little bit at the top of each rep to set ourselves up in a good position before we sink down in the squat. If we are doing tempo, that's fine, but maybe we just need to lower the weight to accommodate the increased tempo. If the goal was not tempo, then obviously show good control, but kind of get down and get back out quicker so that you're not fatiguing and gassing your shoulders out as much. But overall, solid overhead squats from Peter. Gonna grab 2 more videos. I want to look at Leslie's first. Leslie's here. We get the pleasure of looking at her video. So this is her overhead squat. Great squat depth. Fantastic squat depth. Lost control in that first rep, a little bit more controlled here. Really overall, no issues that I see with her squat. We're really concerned obviously about that shoulder position. Looks like we're kind of narrow. If we pick up the anterior view, maybe not too narrow, but maybe we could play with a little bit wider. As Mitch said, you're always going to be fighting for that vertical torso and that shoulder position if you're too narrow. So could we go out even wider? Could we maybe put our hands out here and widen up our shoulders? How would that translate to a better position of our shoulders so that we don't see this show up where we are okay with the squat, maybe not almost falling, but we're okay with the squat mechanics, the squat depth, the position of the spine in the squat. We're just really concerned about the shoulder before we add any load. So can we widen our hands? Can we maybe rock? I saw some folks giving Leslie some recommendations for some correctives. Add in the Spanish squat to support the trunk while you squat so it's not as challenging to squat, and then add in some change plate Ys to kind of improve that shoulder position, that shoulder strength, especially mimicking the bottom of that overhead squat position, or some of those banded overhead squats. Again, we can add in as many things as we need to get in a good position. We can put plates under our heels. That's going to help with the vertical torso. We can add in the Spanish squat to offload the lower body. We can combine a bunch of those different correctives together to really get into a good overhead squat position and start to challenge different aspects with the legs, with the shoulders, that sort of thing. So overall, increase the grip width, play with some of the correctives and see how it changes. And then, as we always tell people, just overhead squat more. That's the best way to get better at any of these lifts, is to do the lift itself. Correctives are nice after a training session or maybe before to warm up, but practice the position you want to be better at. That's how you'll get better at it. Last video I want to show is Kathy, who's on here, who is hiding under the name Gary, I see, but we have Kathy on the call. This is her overhead squat. She just looks cramped. When you see somebody overhead squat with this kind of position, obviously we're worried about the shoulders not being active here. We have some translation under load, but overall this looks just cramped, right? It looks like the world is crushing Kathy in, right? It's cramping her into this small space. We need to widen out. How can we do that? I would play with wider. Sometimes folks do better on overhead squat with wider than normal squat stance. We can try some plates under the heels, and then we really need to fix this shoulder position, because what we don't want to see happen is what we see in this lateral view here. Squat is not bad, but what we start to see is exactly what we talked about with the shoulder position, is that we start to get some anterior translation under load, which we don't want. The head's moving forward, the shoulders translating to maintain overall a good barbell position, but we're sacrificing a lot to get that position, which we don't want to see. So can we widen our stance out? Very narrow squat stance, which is okay if ankles and hips allow it, but can we go out wider? Will that result in a more vertical torso? Will that result in a better shoulder position? And then can we make that even better by maybe putting some plates under the heels and try and get a more vertical torso than we already have? How will that change the shoulder? I'm confident it will change the shoulder for the better, and be able to have that same nice position of the bar over the scapula, but without all the stress that's incurring at the shoulder. Does that make sense to everybody? Yes.
Going back to what Alan said on the last video, this is one of the movements that you're just gonna have to fight your way through for a while as it corrects you and you correct it, and you go back and forth, and it's kind of like a boxing match a little bit. You're gonna go 10, 11, 12 rounds with the overhead squat for a while, in getting comfortable with just enough load that can correct your position, but not overload your shoulders or your system, but just enough load that it's giving you feedback into the right and wrong position, and work on fighting for better shoulder position, work on grip width, work on what I always say is press up into the bar. And when I hit the bottom of the hole, I'm reaching with my hands to come out. That keeps me engaged through my shoulders and helps me drive up through the bar rather than just trying to press with my legs and hoping that my shoulders magically stabilize themselves, right? So play with your grip width, play with what you're doing at the shoulder to make sure that you're mitigating any additional shoulder translation that you can, and then play around with stance position. Do I need to go slightly wider, while Alan said? How do I help keep my torso upright, elevate my heels? But I've got to work through this position and get comfortable with it. And all of us are going to find something just slightly different for us that works best, that maintains a majority of the points of performance and allows you to hit depth under an appreciable amount of load, right? So get comfortable with being uncomfortable with this one. This one doesn't come easy to anybody, well, except Guillermo, because he's got all that crazy mobility. But most people, this one does not come easy to.
Recommendation to Guillermo is to go heavier.
You're so timely with your videos, Alan. Check those crash mats too in the garage floor, dude. Where'd you pick those up?
He didn't even use them. He cycled it back to the hip and dropped it.
Nathan Gentle, yeah. Those are Titan Fitness. They're like $120. Well, I don't know how expensive they are now, but they were cheap before quarantine started.
Those are clutch, especially if you're having a baby. You're gonna drop quietly.
I do. I'm not even allowed to unless I'm gonna die, so they're barely used.
Last minute questions here. We covered a lot of videos that we looked at. We had a good discussion earlier. Any questions that you guys have right now before we wrap it up tonight?
That's only 4 pairs of shoes.
I know. Yeah, I know you have more than that.
Anybody reading any good books during quarantine? Anybody got a good book they want to share? Hashtag book club quarantine.
Yeah, we'll talk more about the pull-up videos when we end the call.
Mitch, you like books about drug lords?
Hunting El Chapo.
It's really good. I'm enjoying it.
Motorcycle maintenance. It's been recommended a bunch. Okay, Fred's got some pull-up stuff queued up here as we talk about week 6. Get my weeks right. Week 6 being the pull-up week. Now, again, if you have access to something you can put your hands on and pull your body weight up, that would be preferred. We have scaling options shown in your movement videos this week. So if you can't do a full-on strict pull-up, please go see our course website and look at the scaling options that we have provided for you as far as a toe touch option, a band assisted, a jumping pull-up, etc. Right now, if you have a pull-up bar and you feel comfortable performing kipping pull-ups, you can also submit a strict and a kipping pull-up. If you are someone who is comfortable with doing butterfly pull-ups and you'd like to submit a butterfly pull-up as well, let's have at it. We'll take a look at 3 from you this week, and Alan will give you 10,000 bonus points for being a leader amongst us in this cohort. So very nice job. That gets you absolutely nothing, but you can cash them in at the concession stand for a pink fluffy bear when you're all done. Also, if you don't have any pull-up bar at all, nothing that you can grab and pull yourself up on, you'll be doing showing us some hollow body progressions, arch positions as well. So Alan's got it queued up, and I'm gonna let him talk you through what those would look like.
So if you can't do a strict pull-up or you don't have a pull-up bar, everyone this week should be able to show us their hollow body position and their arch position. So these are, if you're a gymnast, you know these as your shapes, and your Russian gymnastic coach screamed at you to hit your shapes and your positions all the time during practice. But show us your hollow body position. A lot of you will find this looks pretty simple. It just looks like a stupid ab exercise on the floor, but it's quite challenging, and it translates to all of our gymnastic positions in CrossFit and beyond. The pull-up, the handstand push-up, the bar muscle-up, all come back to these foundational positions of hollow body and arch. So please show us your hollow body and your arch. If you can't show us a strict pull-up, or you don't have access to a pull-up bar for whatever reason, everybody can get down on the floor and show us these positions. We have a video on the website. We also have this video I'll post with Zach and Pamela Gagnon of Pamela taking Zach through these different hollow body positions and finding the option where you no longer can maintain good position. Some of you may get all the way to a perfect hollow body. Some of you may be in this tuck position, tucked one leg out, but find that position where you can still keep good mechanics and show us your hollow body, and then show us your arch as well, right? Everybody's arch should look like this, right? Everybody's arch position. Probably not, but show us your arch position as well. Why we look at these is these translate really well when you're up on that gymnastics bar. If you are really tight into your arch, you're not going to be able to generate a lot of force for things like kipping pull-ups and muscle-ups. And if you are faulty in your hollow body, that tells us there's something going on in your core that, again, is just going to translate into faults with your gymnastics. So show us your hollow, show us your arch. A lot of you will ask, how do I know in pull-ups if it's lat tightness or if it's core weakness? How we know is if you take the time to film these positions and show it to us, because that will really let us easily rule out if it's lat tightness or lat weakness, or if it's core weakness, if we have a good look at your hollow body position. Any questions on that before we let you all go for the evening?
Let me just say, I'll be highly disappointed if you just submit a video of yourself laying on the floor. I should see some serious effort in the hollow body, not just taking a nap on your living room floor.
If you're doing these right, these will make you sweat. If you've ever done a little EMOM of hollow and arch position, you know that it crushes your core. It's a good workout. And I'll say this once, I don't want to have to say it again. Do not send us a video of you just dead hanging on a pull-up bar. That shows us absolutely nothing. Somebody does that every cohort. Don't show us just a dead hang on a pull-up bar. If you can't do a strict pull-up, break it back down to the ground and show us your hollow body and your arch position. That gives us a lot more information than you just hanging in the breeze from a pull-up bar.
All right, team. Well, this meeting did a lot for me just to see other faces and for you guys to chatter a little bit with us. So thanks for lifting our spirits a little bit this Monday night. Hopefully we did the same for you a little bit. Looking forward to some strange but awesome videos this week. If you guys can grab a tree limb and do a pull-up, that's an extra 5,000 bonus points as well, because those are always sweet. We will get out there. I've actually built a little 2x4 pull-up bar in my garage, so I'll be submitting my strict pull-ups from my 2x4 pull-up assembly and hope it doesn't come off the wall while I do a pull-up. So fingers crossed on that.
Fairly certain
Thanks for being on the call tonight.
if I do a kip or a butterfly, but I'll try.
Your whole rig might fall down. Thanks for being on the call tonight, guys. Hang tight for another week of quarantine. Hope you guys are staying healthy and safe out there. And hit us up in the Facebook group if we can help.
Bye, everyone. Have a good week.
See you guys.